Our story begins with Takuma, a nerdy loser with negative riz who is so ugly that he looks like he spent most of his childhood running into brick walls for fun. But he still somehow builds a harem of 9 goddess sisters, gifted to him by the god Odin himself, so that Takuma can become the lover of all 9 goddesses and unlock their full powers with his love. But for now, Takuma's ugliness and demonic aura just absolutely terrifies everyone around him, as the students and even the teachers at his school refer to him as Takuma the Demon, and avoid him like an unwashed gamer. Yamada, one of Takuma's classmates, even leaps out the window the moment he sees Takuma, which is such a common occurrence that there's always an ambulance on standby. Meanwhile, the only people who are ever kind to Takuma are Natsuki, one of the most popular girls in school, Mutsumi, a famous idol, and Itsuo, the student council president. But despite their kindness, Takuma is so used to being hated for his appearance that he's developed crippling social anxiety that borders on phobia, causing him to isolate himself from others his whole life, even though he secretly wishes to make friends. As such, Takuma spends all of his time alone huffing lethal amounts of copium by reading How to Make Friends for Dummies, or just by studying, as he believes that getting good grades is more important than being liked. Once Takuma arrives home, however, he's greeted by a few of his beautiful waifus when he accidentally walks in on them changing, and eats a couple hands to the face in response. But despite Takuma being so ugly he could turn Medusa to stone, Itsuo still doesn't mind him walking in on them, and even rubs her plot against him as she tells him he's welcome to come to her room anytime. Takuma, however, just wishes the girls would leave his home so he can finally be alone and focus on his studies. But this is unfortunately impossible, as the 9 beautiful Valkyrie sisters have been sent by their father Odin to complete love missions with Takuma, in order to increase their affection for him, which in turn will also increase their power level, as love is the source of a Valkyrie's power. But this proves to be rather difficult for the Valkyries due to Takuma's crippling social anxiety, which even makes him struggle to just eat dinner with them. But when Futaba, the second eldest Valkyrie, notices the weird tension between Natsuki and Takuma, she orders them to spend time alone in a room together, which, as usual, makes Takuma incredibly anxious. And upon seeing how nervous he is, Natsuki asks him if he actually hates studying with her that badly. And Takuma cheerfully replies that he would much rather study alone, as he mistakenly thought Natsuki was offering to leave, which of course just frustrates her. Suddenly, Takuma drops his eraser under the table near Natsuki, and because he's too awkward to talk to her, he instead decides to try and sneakily pick it up while Natsuki is distracted, but is immediately caught in 4K. And Takuma promptly eats another fist to the face. Afterwards, Takuma attempts to clear up the misunderstanding by explaining that he would never do anything weird to Natsuki, as he promised his late mother that he would study hard, and someday become the kind of respectable man that people can depend on. Suddenly, Futaba comes in and asks the two of them to head out to the store together and forces them to hold hands as part of a love mission to increase Natsuki's power level. But as Takuma and Natsuki walk towards the convenience store hand in hand, a demon spontaneously appears out of nowhere and begins wreaking havoc in their area, forcing the other sisters to place a barrier around the demon to hide it from the general public. Meanwhile, Takuma is so afraid he nearly soils his pants and says they should just run away and hide, which makes Natsuki question why her father would choose Takuma to be their lover when he's just a useless, pathetic weakling. But when the demon suddenly attacks them, Takuma immediately leaps in and risks his life to protect Natsuki without a second thought. And at that moment, Natsuki sees Takuma's true nature, and her heart becomes filled with thoughts of his heroism, as she kisses him and completes the love mission, which immediately levels her up and activates her powers, allowing her to effortlessly defeat the demon with her holy blades. Afterwards, Natsuki returns to normal and passes out in Takuma's arms, and he just lays her down on the cold, dirty ground like a true gentleman. Meanwhile, the other Valkyrie sisters watch from afar and celebrate Natsuki and Takuma's victory, but Ichika, the oldest and strongest sister, is still unsatisfied with Takuma's patheticness and refuses to accept him as their lover. The next day, Natsuki and the other Valkyries arrive at school together and are admired by all the students for their exceptional beauty, while Takuma trails behind the sisters and frightens the students as usual. However, Takuma doesn't care about what the other students think of him, as he's only preoccupied with finding out his test results. But unfortunately for him, Takuma completely failed his test due to his social anxiety, making it impossible for him to focus in a room full of people. And he scored lower than anyone else in school, despite constantly neglecting his plot-filled home like an idiot, just to study 24/7 as if he's never heard of touching grass. Meanwhile, Itsuo effortlessly received the highest grade in the school, and is always praised by the other students for being so brilliant. Natsuki, on the other hand, scored much lower than she expected, and is embarrassed to have even been beaten by Mutsumi, who's usually rather daft. In response, Mutsumi tries to cheer Natsuki up by pointing out that Natsuki won their little gaming tournament the previous night, but this just depresses her even more. Later that day, when Natsuki learns that Takuma failed his exam due to his social anxiety, she begins strangling him while telling him to get over his phobia, which of course just leads to Takuma running away in fear. And after he leaves, Mutsumi reminds Natsuki to be more understanding and patient with Takuma. Meanwhile, Itsuo has Takuma meet her in an empty classroom, and immediately wraps her chains around him to prevent him from fleeing. Takuma of course immediately begins to panic, as he's terrified that Itsuo is about to chastise and kill him for failing his exam so miserably. But it turns out that Itsuo actually just wants to increase her power level by making Takuma fall in love with her. But despite her acting all cute and lovey-dovey with him, in reality Itsuo doesn't really care about Takuma at all and is only interested in him to grow more powerful, so she can make her father Odin proud and receive lots of praise and head pats from him in the process. And in order to accomplish this goal, she tries to force Takuma to complete love missions with her. At first, she tries to feed him from a homemade bento she's prepared, but Takuma is too nervous to swallow and spits the food back out in her face. She then tries to give him a massage, but Takuma's whole body is as stiff as a brick wall due to being so nervous. And no matter how cute she acts or how many different ways she tries to rizz up Takuma, he's simply too socially anxious to fall for any of her advances, and Itsuo ultimately fails miserably. And while she's distracted, Takuma uses this opportunity to free himself and immediately run away, leaving Itsuo feeling completely defeated. Later on that day during gym class, a demon suddenly appears on the school grounds, and the Valkyries are forced to place a special barrier around it again so they can deal with the demon without any other students noticing. Meanwhile, Itsuo feels confident that she can take on the demon herself, but Natsuki reminds her that her power level is still too weak. She then smooches Takuma and immediately powers up, before heading out to fight the demon alone. But unfortunately, her attacks don't really seem to have any effect on this particular type of demon. Meanwhile, Mutsumi offers to help out by kissing Takuma too, but Itsuo immediately chains Takuma up and runs away with him without giving Mutsumi a chance to do anything. Itsuo then takes Takuma to a storage room, and immediately tries to seduce him by telling him that she's ready to go all the way, and even removes her gym uniform, as she's desperate to gain enough power to surpass her sisters. She then tells Takuma to touch her milk mountains in order to complete the love mission, and although this idiot is completely terrified by the idea of touching something other than his study materials, Takuma realizes that he has no choice but to man up if he wants to help the Valkyries, and immediately attempts to touch Itsuo's plot directly. But despite Itsuo acting assertive and arrogant just a moment ago, she suddenly slaps Takuma in the face to stop him, as she realizes that she's actually not ready at all for something like this. Meanwhile, Natsuki continues to fight off against the demon, but since her attacks have no effect against it, she grows closer and closer to being defeated. Back in the shed filled with awkward tension, Itsuo thinks back to how the only thing she's ever wanted was her father's love, as it turns out that she's got serious daddy issues that would put your average e-girl to shame. But since she's not ready to be intimate with Takuma yet, she realizes that this means she'll never increase her power level, and never receive head pats from her father. But upon seeing her saddened look, Takuma instinctively pats Itsuo's head, while awkwardly trying to explain that this is something his mother did for him whenever he felt sad. And Itsuo is so touched by this simple yet endearing act that a love mission is completed and her power level increases. But despite already completing the mission, she still kisses Takuma on the cheek as thanks. Meanwhile, just as Natsuki is being overwhelmed by the demon's attacks, a newly powered up Itsuo finally joins the fight and chains the demon up while Natsuki deals the finishing blow. And together they manage to defeat the monster and save the day. Shortly after, Takuma and the girls regroup with their classmates as if nothing ever happened. But Inukai, a member of the student council, is excited to have just found out that the pathetic Takuma is the lover of the Valkyries, and he can't wait to kill him. The next day, Takuma and Mutsumi head out on a date together in order to increase her power level, and Mutsumi is incredibly excited to spend the day with Takuma since she already loves and admires him. But since Mutsumi is actually a super famous idol, she has no choice but to try and keep her identity hidden while out on her date with Takuma. But as it turns out, Mutsumi's classmate Yamada is at the table next to theirs, bragging about how he's actually great friends with the famous idol Mutsumi. But in reality, Mutsumi has only ever spoken to him once. Yamada then also brags about being in the same class as Takuma, who he claims is a monstrous demon that's killed over 50 people, and the son of deadly Yakuza leaders, even though in reality Takuma's parents were just ordinary office workers. But when Yamada then says he could kick Takuma's ass, he turns around and realizes that Takuma is sitting right behind him. So he does what any reasonable man would do and immediately throws himself through the window. Meanwhile, everyone at the cafe is completely shocked by this and immediately assume that the demon Takuma threw him out the window completely unprovoked, which saddens Mutsumi as her beloved Takuma is so misunderstood. But Takuma reassures her that he's used to being mistreated. Mutsumi still feels sorry for him however, and is determined to do whatever it takes to make him happy today. Shortly after, Takuma and Mutsumi head to a bookstore because Takuma wants to buy more study materials, so he can study more and pass the exam he previously failed. And upon hearing this, Mutsumi is in complete awe of Takuma working so hard to achieve his dreams, as she reveals that she never actually wanted to be an idol, and was just forced into it by Odin and her sisters. That's why she wants to become even stronger with Takuma's love, so she can be helpful to the other Valkyries. But thinking about completing the love mission just makes Takuma's social anxiety flare up, and he says he wants to hurry up and go home, which Mutsumi misinterprets as him not wanting to spend time with her anymore. However, this seemingly cruel act just makes her love Takuma even more for some reason, and she refuses to let him go home. Meanwhile, Inukai is seen casually spying on them, while fantasizing about devouring Mutsumi, whatever that means. Suddenly, Inukai summons a low-level demon who, much like internet trolls, has absolutely no fighting ability but loves to find someone's weakness and shout it repeatedly. And he uses this power to announce to everyone that the famous idol Mutsumi is in the area, which immediately sends every male there into a simp frenzy as they're desperate to get an autograph from her. Meanwhile, Takuma's social anxiety overwhelms him again as he plans to just run away alone. But upon seeing Mutsumi's distressed face, Takuma mans up and runs away with her instead, and they awkwardly end up hiding together in a tight locker that forces them uncomfortably close together while the simps are still outside looking for her. But despite Takuma feeling incredibly awkward, Mutsumi is actually happy to finally be held by him. Suddenly, Mutsumi realizes that if she powers up, they'll be able to instantly fly out of the locker without being found, so she asks Takuma to kiss her. And although he agrees and Mutsumi is excited to finally kiss him, she's shocked when she realizes there's too much of a height difference between them to reach his lips. So instead, she decides to complete a different love mission, which requires her to smooch Takuma's chest for a few minutes. This of course completely overwhelms Takuma, so he tries to think of math equations instead to distract himself from Mutsumi's sweet lips. Meanwhile, the frenzied simps notice something sticking out of the locker and grow suspicious of it. Takuma panics more and more as the simps grow closer to the locker, while Mutsumi just focuses on embracing Takuma's chest. Suddenly, Mutsumi completes the love mission and immediately powers up, allowing her to fly out of the locker with Takuma in a split second. Shortly after, the two find themselves flying high above the city after narrowly avoiding getting caught, and enjoy the beautiful sunset in front of them, which reminds Takuma of when he watched the sunset with his mother when he was younger, a memory he greatly cherishes. And seeing Takuma's smiling face, Mutsumi feels relieved that she was able to make him happy today despite everything they experienced. Meanwhile, Ichika, the oldest and strongest sister of the Valkyries, has grown tired of secretly looking after Takuma as she finds him stupid, weak, and pathetic. At that same time, Inukai is satisfied with how things turned out and plans to attack the Valkyries head-on during the upcoming school festival. Not long after, Takuma takes a test again to try and make up for the one he previously failed, but he unfortunately fails once more due to the venue being so crowded that he couldn't think straight. So to cheer him up, Misa, one of the Valkyrie sisters, invites Takuma to play tag with her and the other Valkyries, which he reluctantly agrees to do because he's secretly afraid of all of them. Futaba is then chosen to be the tagger, and her job is to tag the players by stealing their underwear. Shortly after, Takuma accidentally walks in on the Valkyries changing before their game of tag begins. But for the first time in anime history, Takuma isn't beaten up for this, and the girls actually apologize to him instead for forgetting to lock the door. But despite them being so forgiving, Takuma still feels completely tense around Itsuo and wonders if she hates him. Suddenly, Itsuo begins shouting at Takuma about how good her grades have been lately, and demands that he pat her head, but only if he wants to or whatever. So Takuma pats her head and she lets out a weird moan. But this moment is immediately interrupted by Futaba destroying the room's walls, which accidentally pushes the two sisters onto Takuma. However, the girls quickly regain their composure as they refuse to lose this game of tag, and Misa immediately yeets Takuma the out of the room to spare him from the MILF's frightening powers. And while Misa and Itsuo continue to fight off against Futaba, whose powers allow her to summon parts of the Asgard castle. Takuma attempts to hide in a nearby storage shed, when he suddenly hears the voice of Shino, another Valkyrie sister, who is confined to that room due to a curse, and through the door, she tells Takuma that a true man must face his destiny head-on even if he is frightened. Suddenly, Natsuki is thrown against Takuma after everyone else has been defeated. Futaba then switches her focus onto Takuma and approaches him in a menacing way while he tries not to soil his pants. But rather than steal his boxers, Futaba surprisingly hands Takuma a good luck charm instead, as she reveals that the girls planned the whole game to try and cheer him up for failing his exams despite always studying so hard. But this unfortunately backfires as the whole ordeal just leaves Takuma traumatized. Later that night, Takuma talks to his mother's shrine and wonders if he'll ever be able to overcome his social anxiety and live happily with others, or if he's doomed to be alone forever. The next day at school, Natsuki tries to get Takuma's attention throughout the day, but Takuma is unfortunately glued to his books as usual and ignores her completely, which makes Natsuki fear that Takuma is not attracted to her at all because the other Valkyries have more plot than her. Meanwhile, Yamada tries to chat with Natsuki, but she completely ignores him because she's busy thinking about Takuma. But when she comes back to her senses, she accidentally startles Yamada, and he's so overwhelmed by her angelic beauty that he just leaps out the window again. Later that day, Inukai visits Natsuki's classroom as they prepare for the school festival, and finds her in a maid outfit. He politely compliments Natsuki on how well the outfit suits her, but in his mind he's cursing her out while fantasizing about killing her and all the other Valkyries. Unable to maintain his facade any longer, Inukai suddenly takes out a red crystal and rubs it, causing the other students to spontaneously turn into frenzied demons that act more like e-boy simps as they surround Natsuki, and one of them even licks her shoes.
Y'all need Jesus.
And despite Takuma being a massive wimp, when he hears Natsuki scream, he suddenly goes Chad mode and defeats all the demons in a matter of seconds. After school, Takuma and Natsuki head home together while discussing the crazy attack they just survived. But when the conversation switches to the school festival, Takuma mentions how cute Natsuki looks in her maid outfit, which flusters her so much that she immediately runs away while telling Takuma to shut his mouth. The next day, Takuma goes on his first date with Yakumo to raise her love level, but the age difference between them makes Takuma look even more like a creep than usual. Despite this, the two of them decide to head to the school's maid cafe during the school festival, where a jealous Natsuki secretly spies on their date from afar. But after Takuma and Yakumo receive their drinks, Yakumo playfully teases Takuma by asking him to drink it from her fingers, which completely shocks him at first, but then he gets on his knees and does it anyways, making Natsuki even more jealous than ever before. And to make matters worse, the rest of the Valkyries stop by the maid cafe too just a couple moments later and steal Takuma away from Yakumo and Natsuki. And it doesn't take long for even more anime shenanigans to happen, as the lucky Takuma is suddenly granted a brief trip to heaven when he finds himself having to remove an eel from Misa's clothes. Afterwards, Takuma takes the eel away and plans to throw it in a nearby pond, when he surprisingly bumps into Inukai, who acts nice at first, but soon throws away the good guy facade as he finally carries out his evil master plan by making demons possess the students at the school in order to completely overwhelm the Valkyries with the sheer number of demons spontaneously appearing. Meanwhile, Inukai unleashes his wrath upon Takuma by immediately striking him. At that same time, the Valkyries, who don't have Takuma there to power them up, try their best to fight off against the demons, but are quickly being overwhelmed and outnumbered by the incessant demons, who are apparently cultured anime fans since they seem to have an unhealthy obsession with touching plot. Back to Inukai, who's living his best life by devouring a whole McDonald's buffet as he laughs about the Valkyries struggling, all while Takuma is near death's door. But as Inukai continues to toy with him, Takuma suddenly remembers the promise he made to both his mother and Natsuki that he would someday become a respectable man who people would look up to for once. This reignites the fire within him and gives him just enough motivation to try and attack Inukai, which is effortlessly blocked by Inukai in a single second, as he is much more powerful than Takuma. But Futaba thankfully arrives just in time to save him, as Ichika and her had secretly been suspicious of Inukai for a while now, who she now recognizes as the messenger of the wicked gods. Futaba doesn't waste any time and immediately fights off against Inukai while urging Takuma to flee to safety. Suddenly, however, parasites that were implanted in Takuma's body by Inukai's previous attacks come out from inside his stomach and kill him on the spot. But just as all seemed doomed for our ugly hero, a special power that was bestowed upon him by Odin activates, saving Takuma from certain death by instantly healing his body and granting him another chance to successfully escape unscathed, which completely shocks Inukai. And as Futaba and Inukai continue to battle, Inukai expresses his frustrations with the Valkyries choosing a weakling like Takuma as their lover, but Futaba replies that he's wrong about Takuma as he's worthy enough to have been bestowed with great power. Meanwhile, as Takuma tries to run towards Natsuki and the others, his path is blocked by armies of possessed students who attack him without hesitation. But Takuma does his best to fight back without giving up. Out of nowhere, Ichika arrives just in time to help Takuma defeat the demons that had attacked him, while urging him to reunite with Natsuki as soon as possible. And as she watches him run off, Ichika begins to feel the immense warrior power emanating from Takuma's body. When Takuma then finally arrives to Natsuki's side, they don't have much time to talk since the other Valkyries are already on the verge of being defeated, so Takuma and Natsuki immediately try to complete their love mission by hugging and kissing, with their whole plot out and about for all to see in order to increase Natsuki's power level once more, while the other Valkyries continue to try and hold off the gigantic demon. And once Takuma is done living my dream, Natsuki arrives like a knight in shining armor with her newly achieved power level and unleashes the full power of her holy swords onto the demon, defeating it in a single powerful slash that leaves the other Valkyries in complete awe of Natsuki's overwhelming newfound strength. Meanwhile, Inukai is completely defeated by Futaba's impressive power, despite him acting so arrogant just a moment ago, and having no power left to fight, Inukai is forced to be rescued by another member of the wicked gods. And although Inukai survives with his life, he fears that if Takuma isn't killed soon, he will grow far too powerful to ever be stopped. Meanwhile, after the day is saved, this crazy and chaotic school festival seemingly returns to normal, with the students having no memory of what just happened, and the girls go back to enjoying their high school lives. At the end of the school festival, Mutsumi asks Takuma to dance with her as her reward for winning the beauty pageant, but Takuma surprisingly refuses and chooses to dance with Natsuki instead. And although Mutsumi is saddened by this, she relents and allows Takuma to dance with Natsuki instead of her, but Takuma's cruel rejection actually just makes her love him even more. Meanwhile, Natsuki is completely shocked to have been chosen by Takuma, but she's incredibly happy to dance with him, while the other Valkyries dance with each other, and the school festival ends on a positive note despite all the craziness that happened. A few days later, the Valkyries pester Takuma to stop studying and play doctor with them instead. And although Takuma reluctantly agrees to play, this lucky idiot has no idea the plot-filled world he just agreed to enter, as he suddenly finds himself spending a non-YouTube friendly afternoon with the Valkyries by examining their bodies one by one. The next day, Itsuo asks Misa on how to grow closer to Takuma, as she feels guilty for not being able to protect the others during the school festival and desperately wants to grow stronger. And although Misa is known in Asgard as a love expert, in reality Misa's never been in love, so she doesn't know much about dating, but she's still eager to help her little sister. So Misa decides to give Itsuo dating lessons by having Itsuo secretly watch her interact with Takuma and takes note of everything Misa does. Inside the room, however, Takuma is simply too nervous to be alone with Misa and tries to plan out his escape. But when he's blocked by Misa's plot mountains, he awkwardly just goes back to folding clothes instead. And although Misa was nonchalant about this at first, the more alone time she spends with Takuma, the more nervous she gets, while Itsuo continues to take notes. At the end of the day, however, Itsuo is completely impressed by her sister's dating expertise, while Misa feels that she actually failed completely. The next day, the Valkyries prepare for an upcoming demon attack that Odin has predicted, so Futaba asks Natsuki to show her the powers she gained during the school festival. But when Natsuki smooches Takuma to activate her powers, absolutely nothing happens, no matter how many times they try. Unfortunately, it turns out that Natsuki's divine energy tank was emptied during their fight at the festival, so she can't fight the upcoming demon in her current state. Futaba also notices that Yakumo and Mutsumi are lagging behind the others in terms of their power levels, and orders them to complete love missions with Takuma. The next day, however, while on a date with both girls, Yakumo complains the whole time about why Odin chose Takuma to be the lover of the Valkyries, as she finds him weak and pathetic for being useless in fights, and unable to recharge Natsuki's divine energy, which makes Takuma feel small and worthless. Later that day, Takuma has to do a private photo shoot with Mutsumi for 30 minutes as part of their next love mission. But because Yakumo previously called him weak, Takuma is more determined than ever to carry out this mission successfully, even though having to take pictures of Mutsumi with her plot exposed is far too much for a nerd like Takuma to handle. Suddenly, a demon spontaneously appears near them and makes everyone run away in fear. Soon after, Ichika and Futaba arrive on the scene to try and fight off against the demon, but are surprisingly struggling to fend it off. Meanwhile, Mutsumi and Yakumo do the usual ritual with Takuma to activate their powers, and immediately head out to fight the demon. But despite leveling up with Takuma's help, the girls are still no match for this demon, and are ultimately forced to run away and hide while they think of a plan of attack. Suddenly, however, Takuma is reminded of all the people who looked down on him throughout his life, like Yakumo, and he's immediately inspired to prove them all wrong. So Takuma unleashes his true Chad energy by leaping towards the demon and fending him off with his own hands, before activating his powers by summoning his divine book, and powering up Yakumo and Mutsumi with an influx of divine energy. And with this, the sisters are finally able to overpower the demon and annihilate it in a matter of seconds. Meanwhile, another member of the Wicked Gods had been watching the whole fight from afar and realizes that Takuma's powers have not fully awakened, so there's still time for their evil plan to come to fruition. After the fight, Natsuki brings Takuma a drink while congratulating him and says that he looked really cool while fighting the demon. Shortly after, Yakumo also buys Takuma a drink to thank him for saving them, but doesn't give it to him when she sees him with Natsuki already. The next day after school, Takuma explains to Natsuki that he's still unable to activate his powers on command even though he's been practicing a lot. But when Natsuki suddenly sneezes many times throughout their conversation, Takuma decides to hold her hand to warm her up, which completely embarrasses her. But this wholesome moment is immediately interrupted by a powerful aura being felt, and Natsuki tries to protect Takuma despite being exhausted and still unable to activate her powers. Thankfully, it turns out that the powerful aura was just Ichika, who, shortly after returning home with Natsuki and Takuma, chastises Takuma for being unable to take care of his Valkyries properly, and even slams a chair in the process, which terrifies Takuma even further. But despite the tension between these two, Futaba suddenly walks in and orders Ichika and Takuma to bathe together as part of a love mission to increase their power levels, which Ichika surprisingly just goes along with, because she thinks Takuma is too pathetic to try anything weird anyways. And this lucky baboon even has Yakumo and Natsuki join in on the love mission too, which leads to another plot-filled afternoon with Takuma and the girls. At the end of the day, Takuma and Ichika successfully accomplish their love mission, and Ichika levels up, but it turns out that she can only activate her powers for a single second. Sometime later, Princess Skuld, a demi-goddess from Asgard who's working with the Wicked Gods, arrives on Earth to find and kill Takuma and the Valkyries with the help of Inukai and Roskva, her maid. However, their arrival is blocked by Ichika, who immediately sense their presence. And upon seeing this, Princess Skuld laughs at Ichika's courage for being stupid enough to fight them alone. Suddenly, however, Ichika immediately lunges forward and knocks Inukai out with a single punch, before putting her spear to Roskva's neck, holding her hostage. This completely shocks Princess Skuld, who's never seen a Valkyrie be this powerful without even activating her powers. And with this leverage, Ichika threatens Princess Skuld to return to Asgard right away, otherwise she will have no choice but to kill Roskva. But when Yamada, who is under the influence of someone, suddenly appears out of nowhere, this creates an opening for Princess Skuld, who immediately runs forward and kisses Roskva in order to activate her powers and summon an army of powerful demons in just a matter of seconds. Soon after, Takuma and the other Valkyries arrive to try and help Ichika, but struggle to fight back since only Itsuo is able to activate her powers for any meaningful amount of time. Despite this, however, Princess Skuld decides to withdraw completely when she sees that summoning demons has taken a large toll on Roskva. Back at home, Ichika informs Futaba and the others about their encounter with Princess Skuld and how the Valkyries are in danger. In response, Futaba decides that Ichika needs to raise her power level with more love missions. But because she can't see Takuma as a real man, the missions to raise her power levels fail over and over again. She even buys Takuma bodybuilding magazines to teach him how to be a real man. Later that evening, the Valkyries discuss what to do about Princess Skuld and her army of demons, but while everyone is busy discussing their next steps, Natsuki is distracted thinking about Takuma, and because of this, she accidentally gets drunk by drinking a random potion Kurori was concocting, and immediately starts to lose control and act drunk by hugging Takuma and clinging to him, while Takuma has no idea what the is going on. Futaba only explains that Natsuki drank a potion, and asks Takuma to take her to her room. Once inside her room, Natsuki starts acting strangely by removing her clothes and pouncing onto Takuma. But once Natsuki sobers up a bit, the two put aside the fanservice and instead begin talking about love. Takuma expresses to Natsuki that he doesn't really understand love because he's never felt it, and asks Natsuki if she's ever loved anyone, which immediately annoys her because Takuma doesn't realize her feelings for him. So in response, Natsuki says that she apparently has a thing for oblivious morons, and she considers confessing to Takuma right then and there, but fears that if he rejects her, she would completely lose her powers since Valkyries survive on love. In the end, she decides to wait for Takuma to someday confess his love first. A couple days later at dinner time, Ichika tells Futaba and Misa that they can't win against Princess Skuld in their current state, and instead proposes that they aim to kill her lover Roskva, who is the source of her powers just as Takuma is the source of theirs. But before taking on this monumental task, Futaba recognizes that she needs more power and decides to complete a love mission with Takuma that requires them to bathe together, creating yet another plot-filled moment for the luckiest man in anime. And after her power level increases, Futaba tells Takuma that she'll help him become a real man so he becomes the strength of the Valkyries. Later that night, the gang set out to fight off against Princess Skuld and her demons, but without Natsuki since she still can't use her powers. But while they fight off against the demons, Princess Skuld mocks Takuma and the Valkyries as she underestimates their strength. Meanwhile, Futaba decides to take the princess on herself and fearlessly advances towards her, while Ichika and Takuma head off to try and find an opening on Roskva. On the way, Ichika explains how despite seeming strong, Futaba is actually rather weak, as she has phenomenal defensive powers but lacks offensive strength. Meanwhile, Futaba grows more and more exhausted as she continues to fight off against Princess Skuld and her demons, but she perseveres thanks to her strong determination to protect her Valkyrie sisters. Suddenly, Princess Skuld is also tired of Futaba's refusal to give up, so she asks Futaba to just roll over and die so she can kill the other Valkyries too. On the other hand, Ichika and Takuma manage to get behind Princess Skuld and start their ambush. But Takuma suddenly starts second-guessing the plan as he begins to blame himself for holding the Valkyries back by not being a true lover capable of unlocking their full potential. And his confidence is crushed even further when he sees a battered Futaba struggling to continue protecting them. At that same time, Ichika activates her powers and charges in towards Roskva. However, it turns out that Roskva has an egg inside her body that activates and instantly powers her up as she retaliates against Ichika. Takuma then saves Ichika from the explosion made by Roskva and brings the unconscious Ichika to hide from Princess Skuld's pursuit. And although he's frightened, Takuma hopes that the hidden power within him would activate and allow him to fight. But Ichika tells him to run back home instead as his powers must not fall into enemy hands. However, Takuma refuses to abandon Futaba and her. While hiding, Takuma and Ichika perform another love mission in order to power Ichika back up, which requires Takuma to kiss and fondle her plot armor for several minutes. But seeing this new assertive and manly side of the usually pathetic Takuma, Ichika thinks back to when she was a child, and she described her ideal man to Odin, which she now realizes has been Takuma all along, as she embraces him deeply even after the love mission is completed. With this, Ichika manages to raise her power level, and Takuma finally feels love for all the Valkyries. This immediately activates his full powers and allows him to summon his divine book. Meanwhile, Natsuki immediately heads out to the battle site as she is now connected to Takuma by the red string of fate, and can feel that his powers have activated, and she thankfully arrives just in time to smooch Takuma and activate her full powers once more. Now, the Valkyries have banded together to fight Princess Skuld and Roskva, who, upon seeing the strength of the Valkyrie grow far beyond theirs due to Takuma, are forced to use their final trick as Skuld and Roskva combine into a monstrous demon, transforming Skuld into the goddess of darkness. Natsuki immediately tries to fight Skuld with her swords, but can't seem to break through her powerful defenses. But Takuma is undeterred by this as he finally believes in himself and his waifus. And as he's filled with Chad energy, Takuma manages to break the black shadow of the goddess of darkness, and, combined with the relentless assault of Ichika and Natsuki's attacks, the powers of Princess Skuld and Roskva are finally shattered and separated. Afterwards, Ichika approaches Roskva and Princess Skuld to finish them off, but grants them mercy on behalf of her father Odin, allowing Skuld and Roskva to escape with their lives. Meanwhile, Takuma pushed himself so much that he's now coughing up blood, and unfortunately, the fight has also taken a huge toll on Futaba, who must be treated for her injuries as well. After the fight, Takuma, who used to spend all his days in loneliness just reading books and studying alone every day, realizes that he's become a much better person since meeting the Valkyries, and is eager to grow even stronger to protect them all. The next day, Takuma returns to school, and as usual, Yamada leaps out the window as everyone is still completely afraid of Takuma. Suddenly, Mutsumi calls Takuma and Natsuki to see the announcement of the exam results, and Takuma's dream finally comes true as he manages to place first amongst everyone in the school. And upon returning home, Takuma accidentally stumbles upon his waifu's changing again. But rather than get angry, they profess their love for him and state that they'll compete with each other to have Takuma completely to themselves. And then Yamada leaps out the window